Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's vlog is another installment in my vlog series where I am reading my way through Sadie Hartmann, aka Mother Horrors, 101 horror books to read before you're murdered book. The last category of books that I read in the last vlog was coming of age horror, so I felt like it was only fitting for this vlog to read the recommendations in the creepy kids horror category. Last time we read a number of stories about youth battling horror and defeating evil, and in this installation we have creepy little kids doing the exact opposite, in which they are the vehicles of terror. About this section, Mother Horror says that it's unnatural, even counterintuitive to the way our instinct as adults is to protect the little ones and save them from predators. It's hard to imagine a predatory child, and this is why the stories in this section are so horrific. Creepy kids have a big advantage because it's unexpected, especially for those of us drawn to coming-of-age horror, where the children are often the unlikely heroes. Nobody sees it coming when they're the villains. I am really looking forward to this one. This one's going to be a little bit of a shorter video in this series because there are 3 book recommendations that Sadie Hartmann has given to us, and I have already read one of them. The book that I have already read in this category is Baby Teeth by Zoje, and this came out in 2018. I actually read this one the year it released, and I was, to be fair, a very different reader back then. I really only got back into reading books at the level of books that I read now after I graduated college. I've always been such a huge reader, but in high school and college that tapered off as I was prioritizing reading books for my classes, and then just I didn't have a lot of downtime to exclusively dedicate to reading the way it's become my primary hobby as an adult who no longer is in school. So I did read this right when it came out, and it was okay. I thought this one was very interesting. This one I think would have a lot of crossover appeal for thriller readers. It's very fast-paced, very twisty and turny. It's about a family of 3, and we follow the mother's perspective and the daughter's perspective, if I'm remembering correctly. It has been a while, but we are following this family, and the mother starts to suspect that something is just very, very wrong with her daughter, and she suspects that her daughter is trying to get rid of her in a way. So this one definitely very fast-paced, and it had a lot of plot twists and just interesting elements. It was a very fast, very compelling read. I just thought it was okay, but I would, recommend this to thriller readers who are looking to get into horror, or plot-driven horror readers who want something a little bit more on the faster side. This one was middle of the road for me because I remember not really loving like the daughter's perspective. She just didn't really feel true to her age for me, and then also I prefer a slower burn horror to a faster paced one, but overall I enjoyed this. So because I have read this one, there are 2 books that I'm going to get to in this vlog. The first one is going to be Suffer the Children by DiLouie. This came out in 2014, and this is an author that I have read multiple things from before with mixed results, so I'm intrigued by that one. And then I will also be reading The Laws of the Skies by Grégoire Courtois. I'll have to double check that when I get this book out, just to make sure that I'm doing that pronunciation okay. So these are the 2 books that I'll be reading for this vlog. I am going to be starting out with Suffer the Children by DiLouie. Mother Horror says Suffer the Children takes place during a global pandemic known as Herod syndrome, an illness that only affects children and ultimately claims their lives. A whole generation is wiped out. It's a devastating blow to humanity, and parents left behind to grieve their collective loss. But the children begin to come back, seemingly unharmed, but with an appetite for blood. Mother Horror says, I love hybrid horror, and this book mashes up the best of 3 worlds: zombies, vampires, and creepy children. Suffer the Children is a provocative modern look at the nuclear family during an apocalypse, and how the preservation of our own needs could ultimately be the demise of society as a whole. I love vampires, and I'm very intrigued by the apocalypse element, and I have enjoyed work by this author before in the past, so I'm going to go get to reading this one, and I will check back in later with a reading update. So I am now 50% of the way through Suffer the Children by DiLouie, and I'm running into the situation that I was a little bit worried about running into when I found out that I was going to be reading a DiLouie for this video, because I have read two things by this author so far. The very first thing that I read by DiLouie was episode 13, and that one is a horror novel that takes place in a haunted house. We're following a team of investigators, think Ghost Adventures or something like that, and the book is told solely through camera footage. So it's like a found footage movie, but in print form. It's a very interesting and experimental writing style because the narration isn't typical third person or first person or anything like that. It's as if you're watching camera footage, and I enjoyed that one overall. There were some things about the writing style that I didn't love. However, I chalked that up to the experimental writing style. I was still intrigued in giving this author another shot. Last year, I read How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive, and I really did not like that one. And the writing style that I wasn't really a fan of in episode 13 actually was more prevalent, and I noticed things I didn't like about it more when it was written in the more traditional form. And just the characters in both of those books were really insufferable. And again, for episode 13, it kind of worked really well. Think of the movie Grave Encounters or even Ghost Adventures if you're not a fan of Zach Bacon's. Like the very over-the-topness of the main characters worked a little bit well for that one, because of course people, when they're filming any type of reality TV, they're going to put on a persona for the camera. So I thought some of what that was because of that, but the same issues were happening in How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive, and just the characterization I really didn't like, the writing style I didn't get along with. So this book I was a little bit hesitant because so far DiLouie, the synopsises, when I read them, I'm super excited and intrigued to read them. His book ideas should all be 5 stars for me, and just the writing style, something about it, just I do not mesh with his writing personally. And I know that's a super unpopular opinion, but it's just not, and I'm not getting along with Suffer the Children either, is what I'm trying to say. Long story short, it is an interesting premise. So we have this one horrific day where all of the children, anyone who hasn't gone through puberty on Earth, drop dead, and they all die mysteriously. Obviously, this is a huge mass grief event, and it's going to change the landscape of the world forever. All the children are dead, and for a couple of days society is scrambling to try and figure out what to do logistically and emotionally, and like how society moves on from there. And then like 3 or 4 days after this, all of the children wake back up again, but they wake back up and they're not quite right. Something is wrong with the children. Very interesting premise. However, I'm not really vibing with this one. The concept is enough for me to keep going, and I am interested to see like if we get any answers as to what made this Herod syndrome, as everyone is referring to it in this book. Like, I wonder if we're going to get any answers as to what happened there. There's a lot of scientific jargon in this one. One of our characters is a pediatrician and is one of the people that's trying to figure out like what happened, and to see if like we can have more children as a society, or if this will happen to any child that will be born from now on. So we get a lot of scientific musings. I'm wondering if we will find out a definitive answer by the end of this book, so I'm reading for that. And then just societally, it's a very interesting, the implications of everything that is happening, because obviously when all of the children died, we had a whole generation disappearing. So that's unnerving to figure out. And then you also think into the future, and can anyone have any more kids, or is this the end of the human race? And then you also have the logistics of now there are millions of bodies that are rotting and need to be disposed of, and crematoriums are full and mortuaries are full, and that I kind of wanted a little bit more of, because they did dispose of a lot of bodies. A lot of children were, they had autopsies done on them for science to try and figure out about what happened, and then a lot of them were cremated, and I thought we'd get a little bit more on that because that's horrific, because that happened, and then the implication of a lot of these children came back. So what happened to the ones that were very definitively buried or cremated or things like that? So I wanted a little bit more of that. The pacing is just a little bit interesting with things like that, and kind of exploring exactly what a society would look like, because obviously everyone who's a parent at the same time is struck by grief. You don't expect them to go into work because they're grieving, but that's like a lot of people, a lot of generations. Like pretty much everyone on earth is impacted by this horrific grief event. So I wanted like more exploration of that. I don't think we're going to get that exploration on like a bigger level. I think we're going to be just following a couple of families and their own emotional journeys, and that is where I'm really not enjoying it, because like I mentioned, we follow that doctor. His point of view is okay. I don't really have any major complaints about him, except for the fact that he and his wife tragically suffered the loss of their child about 2 years before this happened. So they're in like a very interesting spot in the relationship. Obviously, the death of a child can really either make a marriage stronger or break it apart, and the things that he talks about with his wife are really like, I don't like that. And I understand that everyone goes through grief differently, but he's had several conversations about the fact that it's weird to him that his wife doesn't want to start over and have another child, and it's happened multiple times. And even like after this Harrods event happened, he was talking to his wife about how it'd be the most patriotic, and I'm quoting here, the most patriotic thing a couple could do is try and reproduce, to have a new generation appear. So that's weird. That's weird to me. I don't like that. The science about his point of view chapters are interesting. We also follow a couple who don't seem to like each other, don't like that. They have 2 kids. We're following the wife and her husband, and he's pretty terrible. She's fine. She doesn't seem as fleshed out as he is, and he's not a great person. And again, grief can make you do weird things, but it really seems like he's the type of guy that unironically is like, I hate my wife, I hate my kids, and think that that's like fine. I don't like being in his head. And then we also follow a single mom as well. And I don't know, the internal monologues of all of these characters feel very strange, and you would expect this to have a lot of emotional weight and emotional impact. I'm not feeling that when I'm reading this book, just because I think the characters are like not fully fleshed out. The horror of this comes from me after I put the book down, thinking about, oh my God, what if this happened to my family and the people I care about? That's where it gets horrific. Or when I, as the reader, start thinking about the implications of different things like pregnant women and people who had cremated their children before the rest of the children came back. Like I'm going down all these avenues myself, and I find that is the terror. And the children and the parents that we're following, I'm not huge fans of, and I'm not getting that emotional weight just because I'm not getting that character development. So 50% of the way in, we've really started on the children are all back now. Are they actually back though? Because they seem to still be rotting and dead in a lot of ways, and they have a thirst for blood, and we'll kind of see how that progresses. So yeah, this one, I don't love the characters or the character development. If we're going to have unlikable characters, I really need to have like a great character study. So yeah, 50% of the way in, the premise is super interesting, and I'm really interested to see how, or if this story wraps up, what are the implications for society. And just the character work is a little bit lacking, so I hope we get more character development, and then therefore we'll have more emotional beats and emotional weight with the things that are going on, because we are following these characters. So hopefully that turns around for the next 50% of this book, but I'm going to go get to reading. I will check back in when I'm finished. So I finished Suffer the Children by DiLouie, and I didn't end up liking this one, and I am glad that I had one more shot with this author, that this book series challenged me, or not book series, but video series challenged me to read one more thing by him so I could kind of figure out definitively whether or not I want to continue with his books moving forward, and it didn't work for me. The latter 50% of this book, I did manage to check out the audiobook. So 50 to 70% of this one, I listened to the audio because I was doing other things and I wanted to read a book while I was making dinner, doing laundry, all that sort of stuff. So I read a chunk of it with the audiobook, and then I switched back to the ebook for the last couple of chapters of this one, and I didn't like it. And I think there were two ways in which this could have been like a more successful read for me. We did follow a handful of characters, mostly parents. There was also their pediatrician, so 4 main points of view in total. I think this book would have worked a little bit better maybe had we focused on just one family and gotten more time with the family before this event happened. The book's horror and a lot of the book's emotional stakes rely on you understanding why these parents would want to do this for their child, and because we don't get a lot of buildup of how these relationships were, or even what the kids were like before this happened, we don't have that. So if we would have followed one family and really gotten to see what they were like before all this went down and then slowly descending into this madness, I feel like that would have really packed the emotional punch that this one was missing for me. Or if not told in that way, I felt like if this maybe were told like a book like World War Z, where we have a bunch of different chapters and every single chapter is following a different character, because this was a global phenomenon. And I think that the parents that we follow, they all have kids kind of a similar age to each other, give or take. They all live in the same neighborhood. They have like the same social circles. I think it would have really been fascinating to follow just everything and all the implications and impacts of what this would do, because there were some one-offs that, like, there were some scenes that I thought were the most horrific and we didn't really touch upon them. And I think maybe it would have been cool to just have a bunch of what if scenarios and explore every single aspect of this entire plague, like follow more childless people, follow more people that have just older teenagers that weren't affected by this, or follow a pregnant person. Like, there was a pregnant side character, and I thought some of those scenes were the most horrific. So I think if this would have been like created like one-shots that even had like some different cultural reactions to this event, kind of like a book like World War Z, I think I could have liked it a little bit better as well. So just unfortunately, I didn't love this one. And one more thing I did want to say just with the character work, I really didn't like how it was very, all the men feel this way, all the women feel this way. There were a lot of scenes of depicting just a group of people all in grief because they've all gone through the same thing. All the men are acting one way, all the women are acting another way. That's so boring and stereotypical and not right. If I'm just thinking of my own immediate family and the men in my immediate family, like my father would react differently than my partner, than my father-in-law, because they're all different people. They're not all going to have the same reaction. And there were several sentences where it literally said the men were all doing this, the women were all doing this. And I think that's really, really simplistic and kind of highlights like a lot of what I had a problem with in terms of character work in here. I also thought that this book had some weird things to say about motherhood, and in particular motherhood versus fatherhood, because just it was constantly repeated, like mothers will do anything for their children. The father doesn't understand, the mother does everything for her child, and it's a different bond, which, you know, it is a different bond, but it's not better than fatherhood. I just felt like that was just such a weird thing to repeatedly like reinforce the fact that fathers, you know, at the end of the day, they view their children like obligations and that they're kind of interchangeable with each other, and then mothers actually care for their kids, which is just, again, not the case. And I think that could have been social commentary, sure, for characters like Doug, where he doesn't seem like he wants to be a family man, but the fact that he feels like it's his responsibility, even though maybe he didn't necessarily want a wife or kids, to take care of them financially because that is his responsibility. That is like, that's interesting commentary, and I'm sure that is a thing that a lot of families have dealt with. However, every single like male character and female character, if they were coupled up, which all of the couples were heterosexual, that kind of goes into another thing. Like, I wish we would have gotten a more diverse look at families because they were all the same demographic. I think we didn't really get an explanation or a description of any of these characters, but they all seemed like white middle-class families in the same neighborhood, and I kind of wanted to see like other demographics and how that they would react to this book as well. And like talking about wealth and class, it talked a little bit about that at the end, but I thought, you know, following maybe some really poor families or some really rich families as well, getting to see that whole spectrum, I think that would have been interesting. But back to my point, every single mother character had this idea in her head that she loved her children more than their children's father. That's just not the case. I'm sure some men are like that, but it just feels weird when every single male character in your book has that same exact sort of reaction to fatherhood. And just based on all of the men that I know in my life that are fathers, that's just also not the case. And then again, one last thing, all of the women characters, all of the ones that were happy in their situation in life, they were ones where they had a career and they gave it up for their children. And then the only single mom in this book is one that she constantly is talking about how she doesn't feel like she's as good as a mom. And that is fair. There is such a stigma against single mothers still today in American society, at least. And, you know, I think that's fair for a character to feel that and to struggle with that. However, it's one thing to have one character feel that way and have like her own personal journey and struggles and fears, but if every single female character in this book feels the way that the only good way to be a good mother is to give up your career for your kids, it's weird. The gender stereotypes in here, I just felt like really made the characters one-dimensional, and the gender stereotypes really were a disservice to both the male and the female characters. So I didn't like this one. I'm sorry that I'm like rambling and ranting about it, but I did not like it. We're moving on to the next book, and fingers crossed I'm going to enjoy it better. The Laws of the Skies by Grégoire Courtois. Mother Horror says, this book is so taboo. Maybe the most taboo book on my list. It is uncomfortable to read, which I think is the point. 3 adults accompany a group of first graders into the woods for a campout. None of them survive the trip. This description is not a spoiler, it's a warning. The author is upfront about what you're headed for right on the first page. Like a demented, twisted version of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, the characters are picked off one by one. If you feel up to the challenge, this is an extremely well-written, unflinching story about stolen innocence. So we are diving into The Laws of the Skies by Grégoire Courtois. This is translated by Rhonda Mullins, and I'm really excited about this one. It's comped to Lord of the Flies. That was something that I, like a lot of other American students, I feel like, had to read in high school, and I did enjoy it. So I'm interested to read this one. I'm gonna go get to reading. It is a little bit short, so I don't know. We'll see how like the flow and the pace is going. I think I'll do a 50% update and a 100% update, but yeah, who knows? If I'm really loving it, maybe I'll just fly through it. But I'm gonna go get to reading. I'll check back in with y'all later. Okay friends, so I am now 50% of the way through The Laws of the Skies, and I'm really enjoying this one so far. This is a book though that I am enjoying, but would definitely be very hesitant to suggest to other people just based on the subject matter, because it's very horrific. Just the premise alone, it is comped to Lord of the Flies. It has a very similar dynamic in a lot of ways, but we are following a group of first graders and they are going going on a weekend camping trip. They're chaperoned by their teacher and 2 other parents, and it's a group of first graders. And you find out page 1 that the bus leaves, no one is coming back. So you know something horrible is going to happen on this camping trip. And boy, does it. This one really does not take a lot of time. Obviously it's very short, but it does not take any time in having things go well. Like even on the bus ride to the campsite, you start to see the little tiny threads that are going to be so influential later. And this book is really just a big reminder that we're all like a razor's edge away from catastrophe at any given moment, because the things that are happening here, like when they are in isolation, none of them seem like they could be world ending or life ending, but you're combining all of these elements. And just from the very moment that we see these characters on the bus and they get off the bus to go to the campsite, you just feel this dread. You start to see these little things happening between characters and you realize that just things are not going to go well. I will say this book, it's very dark, but it's very beautifully written as well. There was a scene that we are following several different like little groups of characters, and there was a scene in which they were all woven together really beautifully, and I thought it was really excellent writing. Like it really felt like it captured the fear and the terror and just the frantic energy and mindset that one would have during a tragic situation. So we would have, you know, a group of characters A, and they'd be talking, and one of them would maybe ask a question, and then the answer would be by someone in group of characters B having a different conversation but related. So it's just kind of weaving from one group to the other and going back and forth and like seeing all of these different groups of people, and the dread and the anticipation is mounting until something happens. And it's very, very dark. Obviously, big trigger warnings for child death, and the ways in which people are getting taken out one by one are really horrific, but the writing is really beautiful. And the way in which this author captures the mindset of different characters, because we don't get to be in their heads for a while, but we do follow several different characters. And what he's doing really well is, even if we may only see a character for a couple of pages and you get to see their inner dialogue and monologue and the things that they think about and the things that they think are important, it's just so heartbreaking the way that you really feel like these adults and these children are real people, even if you only may see them alive for a couple of pages. Just the things that they worry about, the things that they think about, and the ways in which they respond to fear, very heartbreaking. So, you know, I'm enjoying this one. Like, I can't look away. It was really hard to pause this one at the 50% mark to come on and make an update. So I will be finishing this one later today. I know it because it's intensely readable. It is very, very dark. And what I like about this one is that at like the end of every part, you kind of get the omniscient narrator talking to you as the reader and letting you know that they see you and that you are horrified by this, and just the fact that sometimes things are so tragic and so inevitable, and like what could have been done to stop them in this perfect storm. I just think there are a lot of moments in, not even in books, but in real life, where maybe you think back on something in retrospect and realize you were so close to a tragedy, or maybe you think of, what if I would have done this instead of this, like the sliding glass door theory. And this is a great and horrible and tragic example. The writing in here is really beautiful and really hard-hitting, and I'm so like pleasantly surprised at the way in such a short book you really feel like these characters are real and you feel so much for them. And I just felt so like physically in shock by some of their deaths, even though I know that they're inevitable, even though you know that at page 1, just when you see a character and following them and realizing that it's their time it's really tragic. Another person that does this really well, I think Stephen King does this pretty well in his books, where he follows an entire town and maybe you only get a perspective from a character for a couple of pages, but you feel like they're real. Stephen Graham Jones does this as well in Don't Fear the Reaper book. I'm thinking in particular where we're following an entire town, and especially about children and just the really unique tragedy of someone's life being taken away so soon, because obviously murder is horrific and anyone dying is a tragedy, but there's just something so horrible about reading about a child at any age. The children in the Stephen Graham Jones that I'm talking about are 16, 17. These children are 6, but there's something so horrific about being in the mind of a character and seeing their innocence and seeing all of that potential and all like what they want to, like what they could have grown up to be, and then you see that get ripped away from them. And the part of the horror in this is, in a lot of ways, these children don't realize what is happening. They're 6 years old. They haven't even really grasped the permanence of death, and some of them haven't grasped like the true horror of what is happening to them. So I think that's really horrific and sad, and this is really a hard book to read, but it's such an engaging book to read. I'm flying through the pages, so I am going to go ahead and finish this one up, and I will check back in later today when I've finished it. So it's the same day as my last update, maybe about an hour or so later. I finished this book. And the ending was one where you put the book down and then you just feel like staring at a wall and thinking about what you just read. This is one where I didn't enjoy the reading experience. Sounds like it's not like a great way to describe this, but this book's definitely gonna stick with me forever. Definitely not a book for everyone, not a book that I would readily recommend to a lot of people. I know it gets comped to Lord of the Flies. I would almost say Lord of the Flies is less pessimistic about just nature and human nature and just in general, which sounds like a crazy statement if you've read Lord of the Flies, but I do think that it's more uplifting, even though it's not an uplifting story. It's more uplifting than this one. I saw when I marked this as read on Storygraph, one of the blurbs is Winnie the Pooh meets the Blair Witch Project. I don't know what the Winnie the Pooh is about. I guess just cementing the fact that these are younger kids, but it definitely has the same sense of dread and doom throughout the narrative as the Blair Witch Project, because while they are very similar, I mean, they both take place in the woods, but they also have that caveat at the beginning of both stories. The first page of this one lets you know that no one is going to make it out of this situation alive, same as the Blair Witch Project, where you get like a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie saying that this is all based on found footage and the people who filmed it still have not been located. So you have that setup where you know this is a doomed situation, and the fact that Grégoire Courtois managed to do such, like, you knew what was going to happen. You weren't wondering what was going to happen in a sense of how is this going to end up, but just the horror of watching it all unfold. You as the reader know what's happening even though the characters don't. Very horrific in terms of that. The writing style I really enjoyed. I don't know if everyone would get along with it because it's very experimental in parts. I mentioned in the last update that there are several scenes where it kind of bleeds from one character to the other, and I thought that that really highlighted just the chaos and the confusion that was throughout this book, but I could see other people maybe not liking that. And honestly, usually I don't tend to like points of view switches within the same page, within the same chapter, but the way this was done I thought was really well done. So yeah, this was definitely a gruesome little book. If you don't like body horror or any type of like graphic gore or violence, I would skip this one. I will say I did see, I didn't read like too many other reviews as I was inputting just my review for this book on Storygraph. I did see a lot of people say that these children didn't really act like 6-year-olds and they acted like adults. I honestly didn't really get that. I don't know, I think children are a lot more complex than we give them credit for, especially with the way that they understand bigger concepts about the world. But I mean, mostly I felt like these kids really did feel like kids. There was maybe one that maybe felt more adult, but he's a psychopath. So, you know, that's like, I feel like a different situation. He's not representing like every single 6-year-old child. But I mean, I do remember, not to get like too existential on here, but I distinctly remember being in 2nd grade when I first like really grasped the seriousness or just the fact that everyone dies. Like, I remember this is a distinct memory that I had when I realized that life is not infinite and that we all have a very, you know, short time of life on this earth. And so for 2nd grade, I was 7 and these are 6-year-olds. So some of like their inner thoughts and stuff like that, I remember coming to terms with these concepts for the first time. And I think specifically if you are put in that situation, I think that you would have more of an understanding, because hopefully none of us as 6-year-olds come face to face with a dead body, with seeing one of your classmates get injured or killed or murdered. So I think maybe some of those conversations would happen internally a lot sooner than a lot of other people would otherwise have them. So I am suspending my disbelief like whenever I pick up a fiction book a little bit, and I didn't think this was an egregious example of kids not acting like kids. I don't know, maybe this would have been better received if the children were 8 years old or so, but I also think that them being 6 years old was pretty integral to what this book was kind of saying about the nature, human nature, and like senseless violence and just tragedy can strike any of us at any time. So I do think it was kind of intentional to have them be so young and to really make what's happening so horrific and so senseless. And also with some of the deaths, the kids can't be like teenagers, because teenagers I think would fare a lot better. I don't think everyone would have died on this expedition if it even would have been a middle school trip. So I think it's important that they're 6. I think most of them really felt like they were 6. I don't know, maybe age them up to 8 or something, and maybe that would address some complaints. But I have read a lot of children in horror. I even mentioned one at the very beginning of this vlog where I didn't feel like the child's voice felt like a child. I didn't necessarily get that from this one, but other people have felt that these children don't really act or think like children. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend this. I don't know, like I thought the writing was really excellent. I looked, the only other thing this author has that is translated into English is a science fiction, and I read the blurb and I have no idea what is going on. So I am intrigued to pick that one up because I really liked the writing style. It was very bleak. I wouldn't pick this up if you were in like a really bad headspace. And it was good writing. It was really horrific. It's gonna stick with me for a long time. It really nailed what it set out to do when writing a horror book. I think definitely a success for this vlog in terms of creepy kid horror, and just in terms of a really effective, I don't know if we can call it a survival horror, but a wilderness horror that really worked for me. I was really horrified by it. So that is going to be the end of this vlog. Read 2 books for it. One did not go as well as the other. Honestly though, Suffer the Children is one that I would like recommend more broadly. I never felt horrified during it, and I thought the idea was really interesting. So if the idea and the premise of Herod syndrome and all the children in the world dying and coming back as vampires is interesting to you, I would still check it out. I'd still give it a shot, because I know a lot of people like Craig DiLouie, and I just don't think that his writing style and my reading preferences align with each other. But this is one that I could feel like more comfortable recommending really broadly. And again, The Laws of the Skies, this is gonna stick with me. So if you are looking for something very horrific and you're okay with very graphic depictions of violence, then maybe give this one a go. But definitely a very interesting reading vlog to be sure. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Let me know your favorite creepy kid horror story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any content from me, including another video in this video series coming out within the next month or so. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!